Hey, what's up, everybody? Josh here. What's going on? And of course, I've been talking about this for a little bit, but I want to talk about what's my first comic book review. Been meaning to add in some comic reviews into my channel, but trying to decide what I want to do for my first review wasn't so clear. I don't really read a ton of new comics. I pick up some stuff that friends of mine work on occasionally, and I do it more just to admire their artwork because I know a lot of people who work in the comic book industry as artists, inkers, some writers, but mainly I'm interested in checking out what they're doing in terms of their artwork because that's what I do. I'm an artist, and but I'm not like actively following any comics right now because majority of the stuff that comes out I'm not really particularly interested in unless it's perhaps horror comic or some sort of epic graphic novel. I just find them generally to be of low interest for me because I don't know if I'm not reading the right comics, but every time I buy a few books from the shop or uh, pick up a handful of stuff from Free Comic Book Day, I just don't really get too into the stories. I'm more into the artwork. I enjoy seeing badass art. Like, I can get into reading like a Greg Capullo Batman book just because the artwork's so amazing, or Adam Kubert or Andy Kubert. I really enjoy looking at their work, so I'll read the story just to enjoy the artwork. But I'm not like a Batman addict per se. Even though I really love Batman the character, I don't really get into following the storylines from DC anymore. But anyway, I just when I found out about this comic though, because everybody knows I'm a huge Brinke Stevens fan, and I think somewhere in the back of my head I knew that she had a comic of her own. Um, I just saw this actually on eBay one night. I was looking at Brinke Stevens signed stuff, I guess, signed memorabilia, and it's just popped up. And I was like, oh, that'd be a great idea for a comic because I always talk about Brinke Stevens, and I love comics. And this is from 1994. I believe this artwork here was done 93. It's kind of hard to see because it's so bright, it's washed out, but 1993. So I'm guessing this was done in 93 when they actually published it in 94. Brink of Eternity #1, April 1994. So it's probably the end of 93, and they printed it in the spring. So this is the first printing. I was actually a little pissed because the item was offered up on eBay with the autograph, a Brinke Stevens autograph, and probably a brianpulido autograph as well. It was either artist or it was the publisher, but when it showed up, no autograph. And I was kind of pissed. Well, I didn't really spend that much money on it. Maybe I think it was under $10, maybe over $10 with the shipping. But anyway, this is from a now defunct comic book studio called Chaos Comics that sprang forth in the middle of the 90s, and it's very image inspired. It's got that image vibe. It just has what the 90s comics boom was doing at the time. It has that vibe. The Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, that just sort of overall artistic and story vibe is inherent in this book. You can tell that they were following the trends of the time. But this is the first issue. Like I said, it came out in April, and I believe this is the only one of Brink of Eternity that they made. I haven't been able to find any following issues after this. So they did, I think, sort of come up with a new concept or move the character along in a different book called Brink of Destruction, which has a few issues out, and I've ordered those. So I'm going to take a look at them. I haven't read them yet, but I have read this book. And just real quick, who is responsible for this book? Well, Brink and brianpulido is wrote on this. I'm sure that she had some input on the concept, and then he just actually wrote the script. And and it's not bad. It's pretty standard story for the time. It's not in reinventing the wheel or anything. It's kind of what we would think of as a cookie cutter story at this point. But we have to go back to 1993 here. So I thought it was fine. It is kind of tongue in cheek and standard fare for the time, but I enjoyed it just fine. But the cover artist was so Chaos Comics was started by Pulido and Stephen Hughes, and Stephen Hughes passed away in 2000 from cancer, and I think Brian ended up closing the studios. Brian's also behind Chaos Comics, and Brian Pulido are responsible. Probably their best known title is Lady Death, that I believe Dynamite has now. When Chaos Comics went out of business, they sold off their assets, their stories, their characters to another comic book studio, and then eventually Devil's Due Comics picked up the titles, the rights, and I think Dynamite has it now. That's why they still do, I think, Lady Death, but this was definitely in the vein of the hot, sexy heroine character, and I could say somebody in the group, probably Pulido, was a Brinke-Stevens fan and decided to model a character after her. I mean, with her blessing, obviously. This cover is by Stephen Hughes, and it's pretty cool. It's hand colored. You can tell this is before the days of digital color. I remember there was a little bit going on at the time by a company called Ollie Optics, and this looks definitely to be hand colored, which is cool. Probably done with Copics, and the artwork itself, sorry about the glare, let's see, let me take a little bit of the sharpness off it. The anatomy here on the figure is a little off. You can tell that Stephen Hughes probably didn't really have a lot of anatomy classes, because the technique's there, but the actual overall anatomy is off, especially around the neck and head. And the torso's a little elongated, but it doesn't really bug me. The head and the neck bug me because it's off. Her head, neck's a little long, but the rest of the body's is fine, forgivable. And the background stuff, it's got some detail in it, and I can enjoy it. But it's not a bad cover. It catches your eye. But the artwork and the inside of the book is by an artist named Mike Morales. Mike didn't really do a lot after this comic. I looked for his stuff online, and I don't think he's a working comic book artist. He definitely had some talent. I think that he had potential. I don't know why he didn't follow through with it. Maybe he just thought comics was more trouble than it was worth. I don't know. But this is a great opening shot. I enjoy it. Very classic Jim Lee 90s style art. But overall, reading the book was, not bad. The essential story is these two alien sisters come to Earth through a portal to save Earth from human beings who are wrecking the planet, its environment, taking it for granted. I definitely remember the writer mentioning ozone layer, which was a big thing back in the 90s. And so essentially these aliens are going to revoke humans' privilege by wiping out the species, and the two sisters who were supposed to be working together are actually fighting against each other. And Brink's character is essentially the hero, and she's battling her sister Orkana to save the humans and give them another try, save them from themselves, to protect them. And in the middle of this big mess is a character right here who's essentially like he's like a kind of like a valley boy, kind of like hacker type. I mean, he's just a kid. He's a young male character who's kind of like caught in the middle of this, but he's like a hacker, so he's able to provide information for the story. And I'm sure if they had followed through in the story, him and Brink would have been befriended each other. but he's just sort of caught up in this whole thing. The protagonist, the villain here, she's collecting technology from different places around LA to put together what they call the apocalypse matrix. And it's a very, standard type story for the 90s. I mean, it's classic comic book stuff. I enjoyed reading it. It was fine. But, it's like I've read this story a whole bunch of times, basically just taking Brink and putting her into a story here. But this is some decent art. I really feel like her likeness is okay. You kind of can see a little bit of Brink in there with the eyes. It kind of slips on and off model a little bit, but the male character, I don't know, it gets a little wonky. There's definitely like some Todd McFarlane in the 90s vibe going on. Let's see if you can see that right there. Very cartoony, very Todd McFarlane-ish. But the action sequences are good. It's actually pretty well drafted in terms of its narrative stories. Like, the panels aren't boring. They tell the story. There isn't a whole lot in here that I feel like doesn't work well. Some stuff, like this panel especially, is a no-no. I wouldn't have done this one. But for the most part, the action's pretty good. It's like classic 90s comic book action style. It's fun to look at, for sure. I mean, it's well colored. Some of the lettering isn't so good. It's a little off, but I've seen worse. But see, this is what I mean, a classic Jim Lee style stuff here. Here's our main villain, Brink's sister, and she's very Jim Lee-esque. But Mike, the artist here had some serious talent going on, and this is by all means on the way to being really good Marvel stuff. I think Marvel in the 90s stuff. I could see if this guy had stuck with it, he'd probably be, doing some great stuff by now. But anyway, I enjoyed the story. It was a lot of fun. I don't want to ramble too much about it because there's not a lot of substance to it, and it was only one issue. But you could tell that they were having fun with it. Somebody is a huge Brink fan. I don't know if Brink maybe approached them to do it. They were a brand new comic studio. They did, obviously, Lady Death in it being their big title. The Brink of Destruction stuff I haven't looked at yet, but it looks like they took a turn in the art style. They kind of went more of a, I don't know. It kind of looks like a heavy metal more type of vibe than like Image in the 90s vibe. But by all means, thought this was pretty good. I mean, you can pick up a copy of this for like $5 online. Here's what they call the Armageddon Matrix. I think I called it the Apocalypse Matrix, but it's the Armageddon Matrix. Is essentially the same thing. But and then sometimes this face isn't really working too good. But you can tell they try to make the character look like Brink. The cover version doesn't look like Brink, really, in terms of likeness. But it's a sexy girl, so. But the characters seem cool enough. There was potential there to develop it, and you can. It's so. I really love how the comics in the 90s, they really got creative with the borders and the page layouts and stuff. I mean, that stuff was fun. It was exciting. This is really cool. Big double page spread turned vertically that I really enjoyed. This is pretty neat. This is probably the best art. Splash art. This is probably the best art in the book altogether, I feel like. Very well done, well colored. Enjoyed that. And then we get some pinups in the back. I think we had 2 or 3 pinups in the back by different artists. This is actually a pretty good version of her. I liked it. I actually kind of like the face a little better in this, but not very Brink Stevens-ish, but it's a cool pinup. I enjoyed seeing this. This is a Brink Stevens mail away for 8x10 signed. I guess they were $10 a piece. You get a video for $20, but it's pretty cool. I love seeing the old ads. If you're a Brink fan, you could order away for some pretty sweet, classic, sexy photos of Brink. And here's another pinup, which is pretty cool. The likeness there is not really that close, but it's still a nice pinup. I enjoy it. It's cool. It's nice to see all these hand-colored pieces because everything's done digitally now. Here's a cool airbrushed Brink illustration. Very nice. I know she was doing conventions for a while, cosplaying this outfit, which would have been amazing to see. Here's another pinup in black and white. Some nice contrasty stuff going on there. It's a nice pinup. The face is a little weird, but it's got some good action there. Looks like she's tearing the shit out of a alien, and definitely got a pretty snarly crotch shot. And then we have another big double page spread pin up here. This reminds me of the pin-up galleries that they would put in Wizard magazine back in the day, but the coloring job on this is a little heavy-handed, but it's still pretty cool. It takes me back to the old days. And this was cool too. There's an ad for a comic called Lynch Mob, and the artwork here, this is 1994 or 93-94 Greg Capullo. And not just Greg Capullo, but Greg Spawn Capullo. So it must have been right around when he was starting to do stuff with McFarlane, and probably sort of being his understudy doing Spawn. But this drawing here, which is pretty cool, is classic 90s, and it's got that Jim Lee. He was definitely doing Jim Lee vibe all the way. I think the stuff he's doing now is a million times better and more original than this, but this is pretty good. And it's called Lynch Mob, apparently. And that's pretty cool to see, man. 94, it says on there. And then we get a Chaos ad. Back cover. So, Brinke Stevens. Brink's my favorite. And she had a classic 90s comic. I think it would have been cooler if they had gone with a horror vibe for Brinke Stevens versus a traditional comic book sort of vibe, superhero vibe. I think it would have been better as a horror comic, but that's just my personal opinion. We'll see what Brink of Destruction is like. Those are ordered. They should be here. I think I ordered 2 comics, maybe issue 1 and 2. I don't know. I have to go back and look at it, but we'll take a look at those, see how they differ. But I would say if you're a Brinke Stevens fan and a comic book fan, you can find these online for $5. It's worth a buy. I've seen them signed by Brink for like $50 to $75. I'm hoping maybe one day I'll run into her at a con and she can sign this for me. Be really cool. And I don't even care about the money. I just would be cool to have her sign it and then frame this or something. But it's a nice little souvenir of the 90s. I think it's pretty cool, and the artwork's not that bad at all. It's, I would say, borderline professional. So there you go. There's my first comic book review for the channel. And as always, guys, stay awesome, stay R-rated. Cheers.